Hey guys, today we're going to talk about the role of the government in a mixed economy. Again, download the notes. I got some charts to fill out and some different things to kind of do. Today we're going to start with a review of our four types of economies once again, and then we will cut over into the role of the government in our mixed economy in the United States. All right, so let's get going. Types of economies. We have four types. All right, traditional, command, market, and mixed. And each one is unique and brings its own things to the table. And it's important that we realize what they bring and how they are and what ways they influence everything else. A traditional economy is one where there's little trade or barter, a little commerce. I'm not producing to make money. I'm not producing to provide, lots of extra funds for myself. All right, I probably don't run a business, but I'm probably focused on staying alive and making sure that I am providing for my family and for myself so that we can be sufficient and live. And that's a traditional economy. All right, don't have big trucks carrying things from one country to the next. It's mostly if I'm trading, I'm trading with my neighbors. All right, so it's a subsistence style of farming. Inuit communities in the north definitely use traditional economies when they provide for their people, and that's one way to kind of look at it. Next, you're going to see a command economy. A command economy is one in which the government owns the factors of production and also decides what and how things will be produced and how much of that thing will be produced. Right? An economy where this is it. Now, there's very little say, there's very little options, there's not a whole lot in that economy for many people, and it's important for us to realize that. All right, but what it does do is it allows for the community to provide for the community in a way. Um, Command economies were very popular between the 1940s through the 1990s when the Soviet Union was still around. You saw a lot of command economies in the Eastern Bloc countries, the buffer zone between free West Europe and the Eastern Europe under communist rule. And basically, that's where we see. If we look around the world today, we'll see some resemblance of a command economy in China. And again, they're moving a little bit away from it, as well as Cuba. And those are the two largest ones that probably most known about. So we definitely I see them moving away from that command economy style idea, but it is there. The Soviet Union is a prime example of it. At a young age, you were determined what you were going to be when you grew up and where you were going to work. And the government basically trained you for that position without, maybe not necessarily looking at your skills, your creativity, or anything else like that. A market economy is one in which the decisions are made purely by the markets. They're not controlled by the government. They're not controlled by anything but what the consumers desire and what the suppliers supply. All right. So what we see with that is we see this kind of idea that it's 100% controlled by our supply curves and our demand curves. And that's the only thing that makes this market happen. Realistically, this market does not exist. There's not really a chance for it. The government will always try to get its hands in there and want to make sure that we are definitely going about and making sure that this is taken care of. So this is an economy in which decisions about production, again, are controlled by the markets, not by a government, not by anybody else. Real world examples are really hard to find because it doesn't exist, but you can kind of think of maybe off government style transactions, things that the government doesn't necessarily support or believe in. Could be a way to kind of get an idea of what the market is, what a market economy is like. The last one is the type that we have here in the United States. And a mixed economy is an economy in which the government has some say and the government has some say in other areas, but mostly we're allowed to kind of be predetermined. Big part of a mixed economy is this idea of entrepreneurship. Right? If I come up with an idea, I can go out and I can set forth and I can create and I can make money. All right? I know quite a few small business owners, and that's kind of what they've decided to do is they're going after that, trying to kind of fit things through and get things taken care of. All right, but the government works with the markets and they decide things. Now, in the United States, a prime example would be subsidies that we pay farmers for things like milk, wheat, and soy. All right, obviously, those are things that we want to have in our country. We could grow them here, but it's probably not very lucrative or it's too costly and maybe the government will get inside to kind of provide farmers with a little bit of additional incentive to produce more milk. All right. The government doesn't really command anything, really. They just kind of wish for these things, and they provide these things from there. When we talk about the roles of government, we talk about just basically that, the government's going to be involved, and you're not going to get away from governments. It's very, very difficult to do. The government will always see itself as sort of a middleman, a mediator, something along those lines, to make sure that it's getting what's necessary, getting what's needed. Right? The government in a mixed market economy provides an essential role. They provide an essential role. They don't interfere with most aspects, but they do things that protect the consumer, protect the citizenry, and protect the people in the goods and the services of the nation as a whole. We're going to look at 6 different roles that the government plays in our economy, or 6 different things the government should be doing and how they do it. The first one is maintaining legal and social framework. This is basically the government's going to set rules for businesses and corporations to work within, right? We don't have this idea that like I can go and do whatever I want. My competition's competing. I'm just going to, knock them out and take all their things. We have laws in place, and that's what the government does, is it maintains the laws set forth for doing business. So like, let's say that we have a government agency like the Environmental Protection Agency. They could provide legal and social framework to protect the air from toxic chemicals. And if you decide to break it, you're going to be fined. And it's going to be the way that the EPA tries to force you into compliance. And you start to kind of see that. So 2 really good examples of is our protections of private property through copyright law, through patent law, and through intellectual property. The songs that you download off of YouTube, again, that's probably not the most legal way to get music. I would recommend buying it. But basically, you're taking somebody else's private property. You're taking that recording artist's private property, right? And they want to protect the common good. The EPA protecting the environment, making it safe for everyone to live in, is a prime example of one thing that they can do to make it so that we protect the common good, protecting all of our people. The next is they want to maintain competition. The government will have specific rules to relate to competition. Ultimately the government is trying to protect us, the consumer, by not allowing one person or one company to control the entire market for a product. What we're doing is we are allowing more competition, we're allowing more innovation, and we're allowing things to happen in a way that's more beneficial to the consumer. It's great. I can go and I can buy a TV that's 5 years old and it still works. But what about all these new TVs? If we didn't have this competition, we could all be buying TVs that were 5, 6, 7, 10 years old and not know about these new technologies, these new cool things that the TVs can do. 2 really good examples of this would be the Microsoft antitrust case, which we already looked at, and we kind of saw how that played out and what ultimately happened. Remember, Microsoft won on the appeal that they didn't have to break up their company for including different parts of Microsoft's Office and Microsoft's web browser into the Windows package. Next, we saw the Department of Justice reviews mergers. When we talk about airline mergers, the Department of Justice is all over that to make sure that we as consumers of air travel have a better price than what could happen if we only had one. And that's things that we've done. We've looked at these for almost 100 years in our country, over 100 years, where we've been examining the trusts and the mergers of companies to make sure that one company is not gaining too strong of a market hold. The next one is to provide public goods and services. Right? This one is a little iffy, and this one gets a little more political because the government should be providing these goods and services, but how the government provides them can be a different story. Right? Provide services that individual businesses cannot or should not provide. The cannot is they're not capable of doing it because it's too large of a scale. The should not would be if one company controlled it, what would happen? Now we're seeing a huge debate around the country discussing net neutrality with this public goods and services. Should the government step in to provide us with net neutrality is a question that's going to unfold over the next couple of years. All right. But when we talk about public goods and services, what we're talking about is we're talking about goods for the use of all citizens. Parks, recreation areas, state forests, national forests, roads, bridges, dams, you name it. If it's one of those big things like an airport, a seaport, a harbor, the public good is that item, and the government is providing it for the use of all citizens. Now, obviously, some harbors are meant for different things, and some airports are meant for different things, but for the most part, it's all there. Also, public schools. Government's providing for your education, right? The state government of Indiana puts a pure pupil dollar amount on you, the student, to make sure that you guys have the opportunity to get an education. So the school takes in money for each student in the building and has to kind of balance their costs with that. Those would be two examples of providing public goods and services. The next one is to redistribute income. The government will redistribute the income from the wealthy businesses and citizens to the less wealthy businesses and citizens, and they'll call it something clever, not redistributing the income, but they'll call it a tax. All right, and what will happen with this tax, and this is kind of going to get a little iffy, but what will happen with this tax is some of the tax money will go to providing for the federal government. Other parts of our tax go to providing for health care for people, providing for Social Security retirement for people, providing for different things for different people. All right, and we may see it also with subsidies to make sure that we're kind of doing that. All right, but when we look at this, we're talking about food assistance programs and tax returns. If you work for the whole year and you pay more taxes in than the government decides you should, they'll give you back that money. If you don't work, you might get a welfare check or a food assistance program to make sure that you're able to eat. And it's really important because the government is doing this to provide for its citizens, all right, to provide for that domestic and tranquil safety of all citizens, like the preamble says. And they're doing it in a way that is kind of difficult and different, and things that become very politicalized. So what you see with that is you see this idea of the government taking some things and providing it for them. So I pay my taxes all the time, and every year I tend to get money back. Just the way that works. The withholding that we do is we are withholding enough that we ultimately have to pay amount in taxes, and my wife and I pay over every year. We need to also stabilize the economy. That's one thing the government needs to do. The government will maintain the economy and try to eliminate swings, like big ups and downs in the economy, recessions and depressions and peaks and expansionary systems. And we're going to talk about that coming up. But basically, the government will maintain it and try to do its best. The government does not want large changes. A big swing in unemployment is bad, right? A huge swing in inflation is bad. We want to make sure that things like unemployment and inflation are staying very steady and allowing for that. So when people become unemployed, besides unemployment insurance, which would be redistributing the income, we see things like job training programs, or we see the Federal Reserve, and we're going to jump into the Federal Reserve and talk about the Federal Reserve probably after Thanksgiving. But the Federal Reserve does quite a few things to provide and stabilize the economy. When the economy was really bad, the Federal Reserve created, in a way, not literally, but in a way, more money for the citizens to have. And then ultimately, when the economy started to get better, they started to pull some of that money out of the economy to keep things, nice and balanced. And that's how we see the stabilization of the economy when we talk about that. So it's really important that we see a stable economy. It makes a government feel good. It makes everybody feel good. The last one is to correct externalities. And this will be to take steps that make the consequences of actions in the economy less strong, less dangerous, less impactful than before. Government doesn't want to see issues that, like, if one company closes and then like 7 other companies have to close because they all supply this large corporation. So what they'll do is they'll make sure that these things are corrected, and they'll do things like bail out General Motors and bail out Chrysler. All right, so that when you see these American car makers, what you see is this idea that you're starting to kind of have, the government protecting these things and making sure that these things are good to go. The last one would be the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, the stimulus package. we tried to correct the economy, correct the externalities during that period by providing people with job training, job programs, road construction, so forth and so on, to make sure that we could see our economy growing in a way that we really wanted to see it grow. In summary, we talked about the 4 types of economies: the command, the traditional, the market, and the mixed. And we also talked about the 6 roles of government, including maintain a legal and social framework, maintain competition, provide public goods and services, redistribute income, stabilize the economy, and correct externalities. Now, we will continue talking about these in groups of 2 over the course of the next couple days, all right, which will take us through the end of next week, and we will be on Thanksgiving break. So thanks for watching. I appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you guys. Take care.